Okay, again, welcome. Today our topic is again on China today about its sustainability. But I would like to this opportunity to rather look into a little bit more political. So let me just start the share screen first. Okay, I put the screen a little bit over there so I can see the whole screen. Okay, today is about economics and technology. And next week, we'll focus on China's political system and see whether China can sustain itself. I want to clarify a common found misconception first is the so-called resource curse. Try to answer the question why many resource-rich countries are poor. Is that really the case? The IMF, International Monetary Fund, classifies 51 countries as resource rich, which are defined by countries which derive at least 25% of export or 25% of fiscal revenue comes from non-renewable natural resources. For example, are we Australia a resource-rich country? I suppose yes, because we do export a lot of iron ore and coal, etc. But our export of, for example, wheat, sorghum, etc., these are renewable. It's not considered as we export a lot of them. We are just agricultural country, exporting country. It's not a resource-rich country. So that definition restricted to non-renewable natural resources. The second is that they also find that common characteristic of the 29 countries. Oh, sorry. Among them, 29 of those countries are low or lower income, middle income. So almost a little bit over half, okay, of 51 countries resource rich. Of them, 29 of them are in the low or low middle income. These 29 countries include extremely dependent on resource wealth for fiscal revenue, export sales, or both, very low saving rates, poor growth performance, and highly volatile resource revenues. Again, we know that, for example, Australia and New Zealand combined is the world's largest producer of wool. But unfortunately, we don't control the commodity price of wool. The commodity price is controlled by the commodity market, mainly in London. So for countries which depends a lot on resources, sometimes the revenue can be very variable because it depends on the market forces. And then another meta study, which is on the bottom of the slide. By the way, the first two paragraphs are quotes from IMF web page. So you will just put in the words, you should be able to find it. But anyway, from a resource study, then the author examined some of the papers, and then the authors note that approximately 40% of empirical paper finding a negative effect. That means resource rich and economic growth are opposite. The more resource rich, the less the growth. That is not very welcoming. Okay. And of course, there are 40% finding there's no effect, and 20% actually finds there's a positive effect. That means the so-called resource curse is not a ironclad theory. There are different theory trying to explain what happened to those countries which have huge natural resources, yet low or middle income, why they are poor. So I will present to you two theories. One theory is called electorate theory. I qualified it by saying this is an election-based government's issue. If your government does not have to depend on the election to determine who can rule the country, then the argument here doesn't apply. First of all, this is coming from the book. The book cover is on the left of the screen. On the bottom, there is a very important diagram. In this diagram, it divides all the people into three different groups, but they are not mutually exclusive. Of course, we have the residents or the citizens in that country. And then there is a selectorate. That means these are the people who is able to influence the outcome of the government. That, put it simply, is those people who can vote. And so outside the selectorate are people like maybe some countries, the voting age is 18, so all those people below 18 can't vote. Or those are in prison or for whatever reason, they can't vote. But on residents, a part of the residents is able to vote. But unfortunately, this electorate also have further limitations. It's not just any simple voters. Rather, they say this electorate is able to actually exert influence to the outcome of the winning coalition. Basically, for example, we have the Labour Party, we have the Liberal Party, we have the national parties. Members in that party is in this selectorate because they put people up for election. We voters don't have the say to nominate vote candidates. Not that we can't, but practically we don't and we can't. If we just put somebody up for election as a candidate, the chance of winning is almost zero. So is in the case of the United States. We know that they have two major parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. Independent presidents, yes, there are one or two independent candidates, but history tells us they never win. There's no independent president ever in the United States. That means who can run for it is determined by a group of people. You will say all the members of Democrats or all the members of Republican can nominate. Is not accurate as well, because after all, there is a central group, maybe 100 something, who actually controls who can get nominated. Of course, they have the pseudo democratic way of saying every candidate needs to win the states in order to get nominated. I call it pseudo because it's highly controlled. I think everybody should know the political reality. So by grouping like this, then this offers for them. The first one is the main offer. Put out the theory like that. When an autocratic country has lots of natural resources, the ruler's optimal strategy for political survival is to use that revenue to buy the loyalty of critical support groups and oppress the rest of the population by denying them civil liberties and underfunding education and infrastructure. Education, liberty, and infrastructure can make the people more productive, but they also make it easier for them to organize opposition movements. Since the ruler can obtain sufficient revenue from his country's natural resources, he has no need for a productive populace and therefore does not have to risk liberalization. By contrast, a dictator with few natural resources, there may be a necessity for the ruler to liberalize his society somewhat so that the economy can be organized more efficiently and to invest in education and healthcare to create a skilled, heavy workforce. Now, these two paragraphs is highly loaded with emotion. A country with few natural resources is not necessarily ruled by a dictator. But you would say, a dictatorship with few natural resources, that means countries with few natural resources must be a dictator, almost. So that the paragraph here is highly loaded. But the underlying assumption here is that education, liberty, and infrastructure can improve the country's efficiency and hence becomes more rich. That is underlying assumption, which I would say yes to a certain degree. I will explain a bit more about my own view a bit later on. Now, another theory is this called Dutch disease. It comes from, I don't know why it's called Dutch disease, but it comes from a instance where Dutch suddenly finds a lot of, I think, a natural resource. I think it's oil, something like that. And suddenly, the other part of the French economy is overtaken by the production of these natural resources, and hence it called a Dutch disease. It's about relative development. The whole idea is that if there is a sector which can easily get a lot of money and earn a lot of money, then the government will neglect, or the population will neglect the other part of the economy, which is not performing as easy a lot in terms of making profit. So it is again a highly capitalist explanation. The apparent causal relationship between the increased economic development of a specific sector, for example, natural resources, then it will lead to a decline in other sectors. The presumed mechanism is that while revenues increase in a growing sector, or the inflows of foreign aid, the given economy's currency becomes strong compared to foreign currency. This results in the country's other export becoming more expensive for other countries to buy, while imports become cheaper, altogether rendering these sectors less competitive. There is a lot of truth behind this, and that will help us explain why United States in decline. United States is able to print US dollars. We know that US dollars is generated by government debts. So the president issue a certain government debts called bonds, government bonds or treasuries, and send the treasuries to the Federal Reserve Bank. The Federal Reserve Bank consider these government debit notes or treasury as asset, would increase the asset. So the Federal Reserve Bank is able to supply the money by printing it. With this money, then whoever recognizes the value of these printed papers is able to use it to exchange for valuable services or any goods. Therefore, US government is very easy, without working very hard, able to get whatever it wants by just issuing debts or issuing government bonds or issuing US treasuries. That imply the hardworking industrial-based America no longer exists. Now, that change happened when the Bretton Woods structure is disassembled by Nixon in 1970 something. Before that, we have the Bretton Woods system. The US government promised that its US dollars can be exchanged with gold, 35 US dollars for 1 ounce of gold. But because of different political reasons, President Nixon decided that no, it no longer can do it with the Federal Reserve. You want to get back real gold, you go to the gold market and buy it. And therefore, the linkage between US dollars and gold is broken. And from there onwards, US government can just print any amount of US dollars at their piece in exchange for everything in the world, as long as people still accept US dollars as a valuable representation of a value. But once that trust is gone, I don't know what will happen, but that is another issue. Here it is arguing that when we have one sector doing very well, and people are trying to invest in that sector, making the currency of the country appreciate. As the currency appreciate, that means the living standards of the country is generally raised, increase, because after all, you can get other countries' resources using less local currency. So for the general public, it's a good thing. But in terms of that country's export, then whatever it produces is produced from an area with higher living standard and therefore higher cost. And that implies the goods have to be sold more expensively and therefore lost market competitiveness. Now, is that logic complete? I don't know. I will argue there are a lot of more important variables or factors which this theory haven't taken into account, but I will go to that a bit later on. So while it most often refers to natural resources recovery, it can also refer to any development that results in a large inflow of foreign currency, including a sharp surge in natural resource prices, foreign assistance, or an foreign direct investment. So this particular theory focuses on the target countries' currency exchange rate with the rest of the world. So it argues that because there is one sector doing very well, and it will cause the whole country's currency to appreciate. Is that true? So there are other things we should clearly think about. In the resource movement effect, the resource boom increases the demand for labor, which causes the production to shift towards the booming sector and away from the lagging sector. This shift in labor from the lagging sector to the booming sector is called direct deindustrialization. However, this effect can be negligible since the hydrocarbon and mineral sector tends to employ few people. But that happens in case of United States. I think everybody knows that by now, United States' main export is financial service and banking service. And it doesn't need to employ a lot of people. And the Americans' industrial base is basically lost in the last 40 years because most of the companies with United States capitals trying to seek the lowest cost in production move their production offshore, away from America, and move to Southeast Asia, initially into, for example, Japan, and later on into Taiwan, the four Asian dragons, Singapore, South Korea, etc. And then when China opens up, it moves all the way to China and make China the world's factory. So moving the factory away from the US is a trend rather than a one event, because they have already been doing that. They move their production to area with lower living standards, lowering the cost of production, lowering the cost of labor. So that is the resource movement effect. The other effect is the spending effect. Occurs as a result of extra revenue bought in by the resource boom. It increases demand for labor in the non-tradable sector, that is services, at the expense of the lagging sector. This shift from lagging sector to the non-tradable sector is indirect deindustrialization. So there is one direct deindustrialization, and another one is the indirect one, because people are now doing more trade rather than doing more production. The increased demand for the non-traded goods increases their price. However, prices in the traded goods sector are set internationally, so they cannot change. This amounts to an increase in the real exchange rate. So that is why it will appreciate. The currency will appreciate. So there are three basic ways to reduce this threat of Dutch disease. Slowing the appreciation of the real exchange rate by interference. You control your exchange rate. Of course, if you want to control the exchange rate, you have to risk against or you have to work against the international market force. For example, some bankers want to depreciate your currency. They just can keep on selling your currency at the market. So the government, you want to keep the currency at the same level, you have to keep on buying in the currencies. So as long as you have the ability to buy all the currency which is available outside the country with another foreign exchange, because you are buying your own currency, so you must use other thing to buy it using current exchange. So you have a sufficiently large current exchange, then you can hold your currency as fixed rate. The same happens in the reverse. If people want to appreciate your currency, they will keep buying from your market. When they keep buying, you can keep on selling them, satisfying their demand, then the price won't rise. But again, that will limit on your ability to continue supplying your own currency. If your economy is small, once you oversupply, people will know. Then a consequence will be a sudden appreciation. That will be even worse. So this effect only applies to economy with sufficient size for to counter market forces which want to change your natural currency exchange rate. The second part is boosting the competitiveness of the adversely affected sectors. Easily said, but very difficult to do. You have to invest in the other sectors in order to boost them. Demographic adaptation by adjusting your population, for example, increasing education by introducing different demographic related policies. So one approach is to withhold the boom revenues. That is not to bring all the revenues into the country at once, and to save some of the revenue aboard in special funds and bring them in slowly. In developing countries, this can be politically difficult as there is often pressure to spend the boom revenues immediately to alleviate poverty, but this ignores broader macroeconomic implications. That is, again, right and wrong. I will argue improving one's infrastructure, improving the overall wealth of your citizen is always good to the economy. But of course, that implies your increase of wealth is well balanced and distributed to most of the citizens. If your wealth increase is limited to a few extraordinary rich people, now no matter how rich you are, you can only spend that much money. The more money you have, the more you put it in the bank or put it into somewhere else. You are not spending that money in the economy to activate economic activities. So when you bring in a lot of revenue, the government should be careful that this bringing revenue do generate domestic economic activities. If that revenue bring in, but focus and flow to a few wealthy people, these people already spending at their maximum. And the more revenue coming in, they can't increase their spending very much. So the economic activity is not increased. Or you will argue, oh, these people have money and they will invest in business. Well, if you limit their money and don't allow their money to go out, yes, maybe. But if not, the world is full of investment opportunities. They don't need to invest in domestic activities if they can. So that is another part of the problem. And of course, you will say, okay, our country might have a lot of investment opportunities. Well, investment opportunities have to be protected. If your law and order, if your citizens is not able to keep the order, keep the law, this is risk for huge investments. And rich people always consider this risk. So the thing about this particular approach is that you can bring it in slowly, but putting all this money outside in funds is also risky. Risk exchange rate change. As I said, if the result is your currency appreciate, that means whatever you hold outside your country will depreciate as your own currency appreciates. Everything outside is depreciating, and that means your fund is depreciating. So that is always not a very satisfactory strategy. Now, another strategy for avoiding real exchange rate appreciation is to increase saving in the economy in order to reduce large capital inflows, which may appreciate the real exchange rate. Now, capital inflows and outflows do change the exchange rate, but depending on the size of your economy. If your economy is big enough, a few inflow, outflow doesn't change much. So the ability to attract foreign investment is good, but only to a certain degree. To the degree that your country is able to digest that investment. If you cannot digest the investment, especially when those investments are hot money, just come in for a day and then leave the second day, that is not a good way to control. So you have to have your financial sovereignty in order to manage this part. Of course, the last part is easy. Investment in education and infrastructure can increase the competitiveness of the lagging manufacturing agriculture sector. Once we reduce the economic burdens, the whole economy obviously will become more efficient. For example, you can move goods from one part to other part at a cheaper cost. That makes moving goods much more effective. Okay, now with that two example background, now I go into a bit of my rumblings. I want to go back to first principle. Why do we need government? Why do we need government? I will start with some um, college level knowledge. So that comes from a school in US, JC school. I forgotten its name, Jefferson County, something like that. Okay, a school. And there is a civil lesson. In the civil lesson, they also ask why are government necessary? The answer is given here. Governments are necessary because they maintain order, law and order. Laws are necessary for society to function. Life in a society without laws may be unsafe and unpredictable. Okay, it gives us one reason. One reason. The reason is we need a stable environment. We need an environment which is governed by law and order. It's not chaos. It's not this the fist say everything. No, we want to respect law. We want people have equal rights, etc., etc. So it gives one reason, but I think it's lacking a lot of other consideration. The other is coming from this U.S. history organization. So website is ushistory.org. Again, it talk about the American government, and that is the first page. And then later on, I capture its content and then put it into the slide. So the purpose of the government, why do government exist? One major reason is that they create rules. But what rules are necessary or desirable? What is open to question? And different types of governments have certainly created a wide variety of rules. Again, rules and order. Is government just rules and order? Again, these few pages come from the last website. Government almost certainly originated with the need to protect people from conflicts and to provide law and order. Okay, now it has two functions now. Protection of people. Here, protection of people from conflict. The other is provide order, law and order. So it gives two reasons now. Why have conflicts among people happened throughout history? Many people, both famous and ordinary, have tried to answer that question. Perhaps human nature dictates selfishness, and people inevitably will come to blows over who gets what property or privilege. Okay, so in China, we have always argued between two things. Are human nature good or are human nature bad? What is our human nature? There's one side arguing we human nature are good. We tend to cooperate. All the bad things, evil things are exceptions. The other school said, no, human beings are evils. Their nature is bad. It is only by rule and order that we force people to become good citizens. Without law and order, citizens are all bad. There are two camps here. The camp here in this question is assuming the second. Only with the government applying rules, maintaining order, that people will behave well. And then we are looking at other people outside your group, another country. Then this country is always looking at you and trying to grab whatever you have. Or everyone else are enemies. So people are naturally selfish. They want to get whatever they want. Or maybe Like Karl Marx explained, it is because the very idea of poverty makes people selfish and greedy. Now that introduced another concept is ownership. Ownership appears about 10,000 years ago. More than 10,000 years ago, when humans are still hunter-gatherers, I don't think the concept of ownership is important, or maybe a little bit, but not that much. But once we are able to store food and then store wealth, then we start to have the idea of ownership. And once we settle down to farming, then we'll consider, okay, these are the food as a result of my labor, as my effort, and therefore I own it. Then ownership comes in. And then later on, of course, we know that we have emperors, we have people owning not only material, even owning other human beings, slaves, etc. But that part is again a very controversial one. Whatever the reasons, governments first evolved as people discovered that protection was easier if they stay together in groups, and if they all agree that one in the group should have more power than the others. This is recognized as the basis of sovereignty, or the right of a group to be free of outside interference. Now, some strong men come along and say, I will protect you, but you have to give me some of your crops. Well, people think, yeah, it's better than somebody invaded us, hit us, and then stole all our groups. So we willingly give the strong man some in order for the strong man to protect us. So then this strong man getting more and more power and maybe becoming more and more selfish and greedy. A country then needs to not only protect its citizens from one another, but it needs to organize to prevent outside attack. Coming back to this idea of attack from outside. Now, sometimes they have built great walls and guard themselves carefully from invaders. Other times, they have led their followers to safe areas protected by high mountains, wide rivers, or vast deserts. Historically, they have raised armies, and the most successful ones have trained and armed special groups to defend the rest. Indeed, in the 20th century, governments have formed alliances, and fought great world wars in the name of protection and order. In more recent years, government responsibilities has extended into economy and public service. An area principle of capitalism dictates that markets should be free from government control. But when economies spun out of control during the 1930s and countries sunk into Great Depressions, governments acted. The US Congress created the Federal Reserve System in the early 20th century towards to weigh off inflation and monitor the value of dollar. Franklin Roosevelt and his Brian Truss devised New Deal programs to shock the country into prosperity. Now we have an example where government is doing more than just protection of people. Protection of people concept extend to protecting people's wealth, the people's well-being. Perhaps government responsibility to provide social programs to its citizens is the most controversial of all. In the United States, the tradition began with the New Deal programs, many of which provided people with relief through jobs, payments, and food. During the 1960s, there are a few very small words. President Lyndon Johnson unveiled his Great Society programs aimed at eliminating poverty in the entire country. Many European countries today provide national medical insurance and extensive welfare benefits. Many Americans criticize this program as expensive ventures that destroy the individual's sense of responsibility for his or her own well-being. So the debate over the proper role of government in providing for its people's general welfare is still alive and well today. They are still arguing whether government should extend its included purpose into other areas like education, welfare, medical, health, etc. Through the rules and responsibility vary greatly through time and place. Governments must create them. Governments provide the parameters for everyday behavior for citizens, protect them from outside interference, and often provide for their well-being and happiness. Okay, now the idea government expanded is not only protection, not only law and order, it also influence the behavior of citizens and provide for their well-being and happiness. This is from IMF, again, from a paper, and this is from the paper's introduction. In today's world, government's intervention in the economy is broad and multifaceted. In particular, one of the important roles of government is to provide social safety nets and avoid excessive market-induced levels of social inequality. Hey, suddenly, they forget about protecting from violence. It now focuses on social safety, social programs. Of course, this is by IMF. So we have to take it into account. At one end, in the most industrial countries, governments try to do too much. The excessive attempts at providing social insurance are becoming counterproductive. In fact, the tax burden required to support these extensive transfer programs reduces growth and increases unemployment. At the other opposite end, many governments of low-income countries do not do enough, either to provide infrastructures or to reduce inequality. And what they do is often inefficient and corrupt. In these countries, government often cannot even produce the most basic public goods and infrastructure needed for development. Well said here. There are two things now adding into the need of government. Provide provision of public goods and infrastructure. For a market economy to flourish, government needs to be effective and constrained, but it need not be small. Causal empiricism should make this claim self-evident. Among the richest countries in the world are the Nordics, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, which seems to strive on a wide range of metrics in spite of their apparent reference for high taxes and public spending. The 20th century saw governments in advanced countries increase their tax take-in GDP from around 10% to 40%, while living standards continue to expand. There's no paradox to explain. Countries which have large governments, measured by share of taxes or spending, also by and large have effective governments. So the real focus should be on why this happens in some places, not others. Focusing on government size is not only a distraction, it diverts focus from what matters. So obviously, that's why the title of this article is Debating the Size of Government. It's a distraction. Okay, we have a few literature review on what is government. So here comes mine. These are partial government's requirement. I don't claim it is exhaustive. It is only what I think should be important. This this topic is sustainability, so I put sustainability at the top of the agenda. What is the government? What is the most important function of a government? Is to make sure that the country you govern can continue to exist. If your government does not make the country to continue to exist, then this government doesn't need to exist. And for any organization, there is a tendency of self-propagation. So one of the most important things for any government is to make sure the country continue to exist. If the country needs to continue to exist, we should be thinking not in 3 years, 5 years, not even 10 years, 20 years. We should be thinking in terms of hundreds or thousands of years. We have to make sure the country is on a sustainable path. So that's the first part. Make sure the country has a long-term survival. That's my idea. If you have any other suggestion, you can interrupt me and tell me your suggestion. If no, then I will continue. Then what should the government do? The first order of thing is, even if I may face enemy, the most important thing is my people can survive long term. Of course, when you have an enemy which will eliminate you altogether, for example, the Palestinian in Gaza, that is a different issue. But for most, we don't face that kind of threats. What we face is how can we continue to grow in long term. And therefore, one of the most important things for government is to devise long-term strategy. And of course, you have to constantly monitor the changes from both within and from outside in order to keep your goal, your country's objective online. That implies understanding competitions, understanding where your country sits, and then if that situation changes, what are your response to that change, and how can you lead the people into the next phase of development? So I will argue that without a long-term strategy, government isn't performing its most important task to ensure that country can continue to exist. Now, of course, we have examples of government suddenly collapse and the whole country disappear. Soviet Union is a very good example lately. The whole Soviet Union suddenly disappeared. What happens? Well, people are still there. Government disappear, but people are still there. And suddenly, once the government is gone, its functions gone, what happened to the citizens in Russia? They plunge into poverty right away. We saw from news people are lining up outside bakery and there was no bread. And yes, Russia is resource rich. It has very good agriculture. It is the world's, I think, is the third largest producer of wheat. And it is also one of the largest producers of energy in terms of different kinds of metal resources. But once the Soviet Union is collapsed, the people in Russia plunge into survival mode. And then, of course, the important thing I mentioned in the previous slides, protect people from threats, both from within and outside, including the criminals within the countries. You have to protect your citizens so that your citizens do not subject to crimes within, arising from within the country, hurting people. I talk about when you get resource revenue, I said the resource revenue need to flow into the whole country rather than a few people's hand. That the government need to make sure the resource distribution is effective. How to do that is another issue. Some people say, okay, we can use market force. Others argue, oh, we need central planning. So that is a communist idea versus a capitalist idea. I don't want to go into argument with any one of them, but I think the government needs to be responsible for resource distribution. Maintain law and order. That is very clear from what we have. And promote cohesion, sustainable living, and moral behaviors. Now, law and order is important, but if people knows what should do, what shouldn't do, then that's moral behavior. And once the moral behavior becomes a norm, then law order becomes much easier. And then we are not an isolated country anymore. The world is one big world. We all cooperate on the international level. So we need to know our position in this huge network of different people, different organizations, different countries, and find your own international competitiveness. Here, I haven't mentioned about building infrastructure. But building infrastructure is actually part of leading the people with a competitive strategy. When you decided that my people will be a, for example, tourist-based country, then my infrastructure changes according to your long-term plan. When you say, oh, my country is better to be an agricultural country, okay, your development plan also changes. So I would put infrastructure under the competitive strategy and the execution of that strategy. So I will argue that the 40% poor for performing resource-rich country is actually due to poor government performance rather than this resource curse. We need a capable leadership in government. We need a stable government. And then we talk about your currency appreciation. So you will need a sovereign monetary policy. And the income from resource boom directed towards improving international competitiveness. Now, resource by definition is non-renewable. And eventually your country need to long-term survival, switch to another renewable income. The renewable income implies you develop a international competitiveness where you can continue to let your people live a good life. So you will need sustainable industries, long-term government goals, domestic infrastructure improvement, environmental protection, and human resource investment. These are all under how to make sure you can have long-term survival. Okay, spend quite a bit of time on the rest. So that was the theory part. So what is the problem China faces? Last time we heard that Chinese people's real wages increased several times. So as wages increase, on the left is a graph from The Economist. The line shooting up is China. The rest include the Asia countries like Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, India, etc. Okay. These are the curves. China started very low, 1990s. China is one of the poorest among all these countries. But the real wages skyrocket. This is almost 8 times here. Almost 8 times here, from almost 0 to 8. I don't know, that is the dollar per hour in terms of US dollars. Chinese workers now expecting about $8 per hour in 2020. China's wages is no longer cheap. So how can China continue to develop and develop sustainably? Well, one way is move up the value chain. It used to perform the lowest value of the value chain. For example, assembly. For example, soldering T-shirts, making shoes, etc. These are low-tech, highly labor-intensive, low-value added jobs. But as China's average wage increase, if all the Chinese are still earning $1 or $2 per hour, the society won't flourish. The society will go back to what it is in 1990s. Obviously, that's not possible, at least for the Chinese government's point of view. So they need to find new growth areas where we can increase the value adding so that the countries can make more money. The whole country make more money, and then the money distribute. So I would talk about how the money distribute next time, but this time we look at about almost 10 years ago. China put forward this Made in China 2025. So that was made about 2015. So it is a 10-year plan. In this 10-year plan, they have identified a numbers of key areas of growth. New energy vehicles, semiconductors technologies, renewable technologies, medical technologies, and a whole number of other areas, which I don't have space to include here. But another problem faced with China is the technologies are being blocked by Western countries. For example, we all know about the chip war. The Americans forbid companies in China to obtain the high-level chips, etc. So that some technology is being blocked. So what can China do? Here, I will show you a few videos. Number of engineers. At the moment, now China is 7 in 1992. It increased to 6 now. 93, still 6, position 6. Finally, 1994, number 4 now. It takes a few years to overtake Japan. 1997, not yet. 1998, still not yet. And India is coming up very quickly. Hey, finally, China overtook Japan in terms of number of engineers. India overtakes. Now China joined the WTO. Even Iran overtook China. '25, still number 4. Russia is still leading, even leading USA. 2009, although Iran is being censored by the West, its internal development is very strong. Wow, United States chasing up. What happened there? Now it's time for China. Over the US, with China's population and with the universities being stable now, the more and more engineers coming out. So it is increasing very fast. Okay, so by 2023, China produced more engineers than any country in the world. Come on, the next one. Next, okay, Real Navigator. Next.
The year is 1953. The US purchases this from Bell Labs, the first commercial silicon solar cell. But these first solar cells are not exactly efficient. If you were to put them on your roof and try to generate electricity, it would cost you about $300,000 a month. Fast forward 70 years, and that cost has come down, way down. Solar energy is the cheapest it's ever been, nearly 90% cheaper than it was just in 2009. In a lot of places, it is now cheaper to generate electricity with solar than with coal, natural gas, or nuclear power. This is an unqualified success story. And if we can take the right lessons from it, this story can help us create and deploy all the other technology we will need to keep our planet livable.
They just became cheap so quickly. It's really an amazing breakthrough that is going to come to define the 21st century.
So how did solar energy go from prohibitively expensive to cheaper than fossil fuels?
We're in an energy crisis now.
In the 1970s, with the oil crisis, there was a really big push on research and development for alternative energy.
Today, in directly harnessing the power of the sun, we're taking the energy that God gave us and using it to replace our dwindling supplies of fossil fuels.
With Project Independence, as it was called, the U.S. federal government allotted more than $1 billion to solar research and development.
That really made a huge difference and probably doubled the efficiency of the cells. There was a guy named Paul Maycock who came from Texas Instruments.
Oh, like the calculator?
Yeah, working on calculators. And he found for calculators, the more they built, the cheaper the calculators got. And he said, same thing for solar. If we build more, the cost will come down.
But before the U.S. could really test Maycock's idea, President Reagan canceled Project Independence. Fortunately, 2 countries were ready to step in and put Maycock's hypothesis to the test. Like the US, Japan had been hit hard by the oil crisis in the 70s. They started funding solar research and development around the same time, and soon they developed solar cells small and powerful enough to run watches, calculators, and toys.
Trivial in terms of the global energy system, but crucial in that large companies were now becoming interested in solar and crucially figuring out how to construct solar at really low cost.
That know-how came in handy when the Japanese government announced a major subsidy for rooftop solar in the mid-90s. But the global market for solar technology was still relatively small until Germany stepped in and truly changed the game.
The most important policy on this whole chain, if I had to pick one, it would be the German feed-in tariff.
Feed-in tariffs, which was basically a program that deployed solar at scale.
Here's how it worked. Starting in 2000, the German government basically said to power companies, hey, if you can start producing renewable energy, we will buy it from you. We promise, for double the market price, and we will keep paying you at that rate for the next 20 years.
And so for developers of solar projects in Germany, all of a sudden, it became like a no-brainer to do this, even though Germany is not the sunniest place in the world.
Companies responded to the incentives by building solar farms like this one.
In 1 year, the installations for solar went up by a factor of 4, and then it just grew.
The more panels they produced, the cheaper it got to generate electricity with solar. Then, another country picked up the baton and made solar cheaper than even Maycock could have imagined.
So it really starts with Deng Xiaoping in the 1980s and had this plan for 1,000 Chinese students to go abroad and come back and see what they came back with.
One group of students went to the University of New South Wales in Australia, where they worked with a team that was producing some of the most efficient solar cells in the world. After a few years, one of those students went back to China and opened up the country's first commercial solar manufacturer, Suntech, in 2002. With that new German law in place, the company had so much success selling solar panels to Germany. Suntech's success attracted competitors, which helped drive down prices, in part because all of this demand inspired Chinese manufacturers to produce at an unprecedented scale. Policymakers around the world noticed the falling prices and wrote laws to create new markets in their countries, including the United States.
The United States passed an important law. It's called the Energy Policy Act of 2005. And buried deep within that law was an investment tax credit. Sounds kind of boring, but it turns out it was absolutely critical to deploying solar. Because what it said was that if you put out a new solar project, you can get 30% of those costs back through a tax credit.
This sparked a phenomenon called solar leasing, where companies would look for places to put solar so that they could reduce the amount they owed the federal government in taxes. Other policies helped create markets for solar modules in Spain, Italy, and crucially, in China.
The Chinese devised their own subsidy program that was modeled on the German guaranteed price. By 2011, China was not only the biggest producer of solar, but the biggest producer of solar electricity.
In the course of a single lifetime, solar energy has transformed from a niche technology to the cheapest way to bring clean, reliable power to billions of people around the world. But the markets that brought us these lower prices didn't just magically appear by some invisible hand. Political leaders in countries all over the world created these markets, then subsidized them for decades to the tune of billions of dollars.
By investing that money, you got the solar to come down in costs to the point where you don't need to subsidize it anymore. We're doing that on purpose with things like batteries and electric vehicles. We're doing that with things like heat pumps. Solar provided us with a playbook for how to do that for other technologies.
So this is a huge lesson for us. You want a technology to be successful, government intervention is necessary. Market force do play a role, but without proper policy, the market won't function. That put all the problem back into the government. And the government pick the right technology, support the technology, and then make policies to make sure the technology can go to the market and drive down the cost and becomes available. We now know that China is the second largest population country. But a lot of people doesn't know that is that 98% of the Chinese people only live in about 1/5 of the land area of China. Most of the eastern side of China is almost empty. No people there. Too rugged, too dry, too high, too cold, etc., etc. Most Chinese are in coastal countries, coastal provinces. So there's a lot of empty space that wasn't able to be used economically. We have the Gobi Desert, we have the other deserts, there's a lot of things. And of course, these deserts, being deserts, mean there's little rainfall, and therefore it means there's a lot of sunshine. And therefore you can put solar panels on these basically empty area with minimum cost. You only need to provide the panels and a bit of whatever to hold them up, lay them down and put it in place. But there's a problem. The problem is the efficiency of this panel drops when there are dust on this solar panel. So you are not just building the solar panel there and then you leave it and then it will continue generating energy. No, you need to regularly cleaning these thousands and thousands panels or millions and millions of these panels. In a desert, how can you find water to clean this? Well, China has been doing a lot of work on the Yellow River. Now the Yellow River is no longer yellow. It is now clear. So it is now a matter of building a few pumps and pumping water from the Yellow River into these deserts. At least you just build one big water pipe from the Yellow River, take the water up, pump it to the solar panel field. The next question is, once this water get into the panels, then the water, you watch the panels, and then obviously there are water. The water will drop into the ground, and on the ground you have grass, and therefore grass grows. As the grass grows, there's another problem. When the grass grows very tall, it blocks the sunlight, so you have to cut the grass. Double the effort now. So let's look at what's the solution. Okay, the solution now we can see is putting herbivores, cow, lamb, sheep, etc., underneath the solar panels. Then this animal will eat the grass. And once the grass is eaten, that means it's no longer that high. That's okay. So the only change you need to do is put the solar panels a bit higher so that the animal can travel underneath the solar panels. That open up another opportunity. That means those workers who are responsible for cleaning these solar panels now had a second income. The income from these cattle or sheep or whatever. So when you have a problem, it depends on whether you can find a solution. Share of primary energy from renewable sources. Okay. China, where are you? Not here, not yet. There's 1968. China is not there. Hey, Switzerland. Wow, well, very good. Taiwan, a small province. Where is China? Not there. New Zealand is going up very good. Where is China? Not yet. That's 1971. 72? Not yet. I don't know New Zealand is actually that much powered by solar or by renewable sources. Here comes Finland and Norway. Norway overtake Switzerland and overtake New Zealand. Japan is at the bottom now. 1977, 78, replaced by us, Australia. Norway is now 70% powered by renewables. Sweden is coming up very quickly. Okay, in order to save time, I'll stop this now. You notice that when the country changes positions, it changes a lot. That means there is something behind it to push the country to change its position. What can push it? Of course, government policies. We see the effect of government policies by looking at all these countries jumping up. And then notice when I said the Norway was 70%, now dropped to 69%. Why? Because no more incentive to push it. And as the energy consumption increase, naturally the renewable energy drops back, and therefore the percentage drops. Every time we see the country's position change, that was due to a government policy. So anyone saying the government policy is not important is wrong. But anyway, another big push is, of course, we talk about China's high-speed rail. Japan started all this high-speed rail first. So it is the first country with 500 something kilometers of high-speed rail. France come in 100 something. You see the sudden growth in the high-speed rail. Again, it has to be driven by both government policy as well as technology. And Japan is constantly building and building more. Then Italy come along. Now comes Germany. Wow, how quickly Germany is building. Now comes China with a little bit, but it will stay that way for a number of years. Okay, now the government, Chinese government building starts now, 2008. Okay, we don't have to see the rest. Again, this is a government policy. If without government policy, we won't see that kind of change so sudden. Of course, there are a lot of planning beforehand, for sure. But once the policy drop to the ground, becomes activated, get executed, changes do happen. Let's look at another example. This one. Wind energy. No, I don't mean to look at the wind energy. Something else. Where? Which one? Lithium battery. Okay. Steel. Solar panel. What's this? This is the same as this. Then it must be this one.
James and I got back onto what is fast becoming the eighth wonder of the world. China's road network. In 1988, China had no motorways at all. And now, 30 years later, it has 84,000 miles of them. That's more than any other country in the world. They're only just getting into their stride. Since 2011, they've been building 6,000 miles of motorway every year. 6,000 miles a year! It beggars belief, and it's not like the terrain is easy. Here, though, there ain't no mountain high enough, and there ain't no valley low enough to stop them. This bridge, for example, is 34 miles long. And then there's this one, the Douai-Beipanjian Bridge. You could fit the London Shard underneath it, twice over. Telling you, in Britain, we're doomed. We're doomed.
Okay, so the question is, on the current path of development, is China sustainable? Is China consuming more and more resources to achieve this? If yes, it is not sustainable because, after all, resources on Earth is just resources on Earth. We don't have another world, another Earth to take our resource. But looking at all this development, we see that resource is not the crucial factor. The crucial factor is government policy. With a suitable government policy, with a long-term objective, government, no matter where, from the West, from China, from Eastern Asia, wherever, can have huge development. The only question is, how can we find such a government? How can we find such a government? So that will be the topic next week. Okay, any question? Please unmute yourself. Anyone?
Yes, I do.
Yes, please.
I didn't really follow explanation of the government in the beginning there. But what kept nagging at me is, why is it that America isn't very productive now in its economy, but our dollar is so low against it?
Now, at the moment, it is artificial twist. During the COVID, between the March 2020 to August 2021, the US government distributed $4 trillion to its citizens. Right. We also have the so-called COVID subsidies, right? So the whole world, most countries, the West, Asia countries, etc., all give citizens money in order to stimulate the economy. Now, when at, say, 2020, the world economy size is 100 units. Let's say just 100 units, okay? We don't know what is the actual value, but let's say 100 units. And then suddenly somebody pump in 4 units of money into that system. So your economy becomes 100 divided by 104 because you pump in another 4 units of money into it. Now remember, in the whole world, we are almost pumping 1 GDP values of, not exactly 1 GDP, let's say a significant proportion of GDP, 10%, 20%, whatever. That money pumped into the system. That means all the prices have to inflate in order to match the values of the money supply. So we have inflations all around the world. 4%, 8%, 8%. When that inflation will finish is when the economy is big enough to match the size of the available currency. Now, United dollars is the world, still the world trading policy, money and reserve currency. Okay, we host a lot of US dollars around the world. Our government hosts a lot. The Chinese government hosts a lot. Japan government hosts a lot. We host a lot of US governments outside, US dollars outside USA. Now, these US dollars used to attract very low interest, maybe 1% before the rate hike. But now, in order to fight inflation, Federal Reserve artificially raised the interest. So if you have US dollars, what do? If you keep your US dollars as your own currency, you are earning your own currency's interest rate. But you put that US dollars into US, put as inflow, flow into US. Of course, the US dollar is going to appreciate. Therefore, the US dollar appreciate, everybody depreciate. The simple reason is because they are keeping a high interest rate. Everybody having a lot of US dollars move their money into US to earn the interest. Easy money. You don't have to invest. You don't have to think. Just put the money into US and then you earn interest. So that is true for all the hot money flowing around. And then we say, okay, I have hot money. I don't know what to do. I haven't found a investment opportunity yet. So what I do, put it into the your own currency's account. Sorry, you only got 1%, 2% interest. But you move it into United States, 4% is double, at least double whatever you get in your currency. And then as money flow in, there is also an artificial thing. Hey, the money I put in is now appreciated. So when I take it out, it will worth more. Because when you put it in, the US dollar is still say 100. Now US dollars appreciate. It becomes at 110 compared to yours. Then when you take it out, hey, you have 10% more on exchange rate plus your interest because you put the money into USS to earn interest. So what will happen in this case? If everybody still believes US dollars is holding value, that games can continue. I don't know how long it will take. It will continue holding values. People still trust US dollars holding value. What if that trust is gone? I am afraid I'm holding US dollars. I want to get rid of US dollars as quickly as I can. Then the US dollars will suddenly depreciate. How much it will depreciate depends on how much US dollars is outside of the United States. Now, US dollars will never default. You have a US government's treasury. You take the treasury to the US government. They can always pay you by printing more US dollars. That's not a problem. The problem is when you get the US dollars, how much value you can use it to buy, to exchange. And our country, included, is at a huge risk unless we manage this. I don't know how much US dollars our government is holding.
Surely that there is concern because of the US debt.
Mm-hmm. And it's horrible as well. US government doesn't have any plan to repay any debts. They are not making any plan, and their government debt is increasing at $1 trillion per year at the moment. And they are owning about $38 trillion, the government.
And are they borrowing from China?
They're borrowing from the rest of the world. The Chinese is reducing the holding of the US dollars from 1.2 trillion to at the moment about 900 billion. China has offloaded about 300 billion US dollars. And the Japanese are picking up that value. Russia at the moment has about 90 million US dollars reserve for its trading. 90 million is a drop in the ocean. Russia is not holding any US dollars. And China is holding at the moment about 900 billion. So it's about 1,000 times more than Russia at the moment. It's not safe either. And that's why China is so keen on One Belt, One Road. Because One Belt, One Road means you convert that US dollars into infrastructure in other countries. Now, we all know that China has been running trade surplus for the last 40 years. So, meaning your family is trading with the rest of the world and your family is making money every year. That's trade surplus, right? And that trade surplus, a lot of people argue, why don't you bring the trade surplus back to China to make the Chinese people better? Sorry, that is not called trade surplus. When you have to bring the value back, that means you buy something, right? That's trade. That is trade. And you can increase trade by increase the imports, but it's still trade. And the Chinese being productive, being the world's manufacturer, always have a trade surplus, and that surplus must stay outside China. Because once you bring it in, it becomes trade and no longer a trade surplus. So China is holding a lot of other people's IOU. Because just like your family is making money all the time. So everybody is owning you money. Now, our thinking of thought of money is constant because we can't print money ourselves. Government is not. Government can print money, and all government print money. So we are talking not money, we are talking values, something worthwhile. When we say Chinese trade surplus, that means the value which China export is bigger than the value which China imports. So you have some values from China holding. And then at the same time, you're holding some Chinese value. That means you own Chinese something in exchange. For a fair exchange, it is value equal. You pay what you get. But the overall trade is China is trade surplus. That means there's a lot of value from outside China, Chinese holding. How do you make sure this value is sustainable, won't disappear suddenly? It used to be US dollars because you can hold US Treasury. And then US, when the Treasury mature, you bring to the US print money for you, and then you go back to Treasury. So it looks like sustainable. But US has been printing money, and they have no plan to pay it back. So when they default, whatever they own you becomes negotiable. Originally, they may own you $1, but because they default, they will argue with you, hey, for every $1, I pay you 10 cents. You suddenly lost 90% of the value. It's $1 for 10 cents is already a very optimistic estimation. We have seen examples in the last century of a trillionth of the original value as the repay value. $1 becomes $1 trillion. And your holding of $1 becomes over 1 trillion. That has happened in the past. And it is also happening in Argentina. Argentina now is in inflation at about 40%, 400% per year.
Hmm. How can they get out of that?
As a common citizen, we can't. We depend on our own currency. If our government does not protect our currency, then we are all doomed. Because our value is valued by our currency. If our currency lost value, that means every one of us lost value. Well, something won't lose value. The utility of your asset. For example, your house. Okay, the house today may cost you $1 million. That's fine. Later on, whatever circumstances, your house value dropped to, say, $1,000. So what? I'm still living in it. I'm still using the house. The utility value doesn't change, although your nominal value of your asset change. Now, my home worth $1 million, okay? I'm living in it. So I'm enjoying my house, right? So that $1 million to me is nothing. Whether it's 1 million, 2 million, 100 million, or $10, $20, nothing. I'm living here. I'm using the utilization of my assets. So if you have a lot of cash, I will argue you should convert it into something physical, which you can utilize. A lot of people argue buying gold. I don't agree. You can't eat gold. If I have money, I will buy a farmland. because I can produce on the farmland, right? The farmland have utilization values. Gold has not had no utilization values. A piece of gold is a piece of gold. So what? I can't eat it. I can't even use it as a hammer. It's too soft. Right? So if you have a lot of cash, now once you have an economic shock like that, stock market, foreign exchange, all will big fluctuations, and small people like us won't be able to handle that. So I will not recommend stock or paper values. I will argue for physical values, physical assets, which you can derive values. Rolex watch, no. The Rolex watch utilization value is the same as a watch from Daisu. So no point. So don't invest in luxuries. These are overpriced when the economy is stable. Gold is the same. But once the economy is not stable, you can't take a piece of gold and go to the baker and say, I want to exchange for a loaf of bread. The baker said, no, I don't have any bread. I don't need your gold. What can I use the gold for? Once then you have no value. So look for something with utility values which you can enjoy. Or spend it while you can. We come to this earth with nothing, and we are going to leave this earth with nothing. So while you can, why don't you enjoy yourself? Oh, any other questions? Anyway, thank you today, and then we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Very good.